For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
The true winner in the election is the rule of law.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
This is ABC News Classroom Edition, the Civil Rights Movement Part 2, Awakening a Nation. America in the 50s was a much different place than we know today. Lunch counters and drinking fountains were labeled white only, and on buses, a person of color was limited to sitting in the back. That all changed with the spontaneous defiance of a woman named Rosa Parks and the eloquence of a young preacher, Martin Luther King Jr. Their form of nonviolent protest helped desegregate buses in Montgomery, Alabama. King was very young when the civil rights movement began to swell, not even 30 years old. But even as a young man, his words were powerful.
It was unusual for the suburban Chicago synagogue to have a speaker so young, to say nothing of the fact that he was a black minister. It was on a Friday night in January 1958.
The Negro must be given freedom and justice because freedom and justice are ethical demands of the universe.
82-year-old Sol Weiner was one of 200 congregants that evening.
So many years later, I still recall the impression that he made on the congregation. We were really stirred.
We stand today on the threshold of the most constructive period in our nation's history.
But 44 years ago, Chicago and much of urban America was segregated. White churches here turned down King's offers to speak.
This is the tragedy of segregation, that it does something to the soul, it does something to the mind. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority. It gives the segregated a false sense of inferiority.
The speech would probably have remained in obscurity if not for Hank Neuberger. He found the recording in a box of old synagogue tapes and spent 2 years restoring it.
It made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. It was so thrilling.
The original recording will now be given to the King family. A copy was played at the synagogue earlier this month.
Alan Teller was there.
He's still with us. And, you know, his words are still something that can inspire us today.
Those who heard the tape said King was prophetic in speaking of nonviolent means as a way to achieve goals, and optimistic about a truly integrated world of the future.
This will be the day when the morning stars will sing together and the sons of God will shout for joy.
Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Chicago.
Things were relatively peaceful as long as blacks accepted second-class status, second-class citizenship. So we had to create some agitation.
By 1963, King knew he needed to organize a successful protest campaign. He targeted Birmingham, Alabama.
April 12, 1963. This was Good Friday in Birmingham. The Reverend Martin Luther King, in symbolic overalls, leads a protest march from a small church toward City Hall. Police watch. After a few blocks, Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor orders the march to stop. A motorcycle jumps the curb. King and Dr. Ralph Abernathy drop to their knees. "54 persons are arrested, including one white demonstrator. Some chant their way to the paddy wagon. Police disperse the crowd of more than 600, but the sun is warm and so are tempers. More protests promised for the weekend. This Good Friday scene very likely to be repeated.
From jail in Birmingham, King wrote an open letter to his fellow clergymen. It was a call for nonviolent protest.
When you have seen vicious mobs, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, you are forever fighting a degrading and degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait.
I think we've had more people to give their witness for freedom by going to jail in Birmingham than any city in the United States. And with this kind of witness and determination, I am sure that we are going to be able to break down the barriers of segregation in the United States.
In the months following Birmingham, America saw demonstrations, sit-ins, and parades by people of all races in more than 800 cities and towns across the land. It culminated in the March on Washington in August of 1963.
The American Broadcasting Company continues its coverage of the March on Washington, August 28, 1963.
Freedom Now movement, hear me. We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington, to go by plane, by car, bus, any way that you can get there. Walk if necessary. We are pushing for jobs, housing, desegregated schools. This is an urgent request. Please join. Go to Washington.
Negroes want the same things that white citizens possess. All of their rights. They want no reservation. They want complete equality, social, economic, and political. And no force under the sun can stem and block and stop this civil rights revolution which is now underway.
All right, just pass them back. All right, I'll start on this side. All right, pass them down. Do you have any questions? Wake up, girl. Or anything that's bothering you? Be sure you contact your captains for anything, and they will take it from there. Do not try to do anything on your own, because the minute you do, you will be upsetting the purpose of this march. The whole thing is an orderly, conducted march. Freedom, freedom, freedom.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report on the Washington March. We take you now to Richard Bate in Washington.
We're nearing the end of the official program this afternoon at the Lincoln Memorial. The cheers from the crowd right now are for an address being given by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's just told the crowd that today's march is the greatest demonstration for freedom in the nation's history.
Just as I have a dream, my poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
With us here today, covering the March for Jobs and Freedom, was ABC's Edward B. Morgan.
The paradox and maybe even the power of our open society is such that those who feel that they are not free have the freedom to protest. Today in Washington, some 200,000 persons, Negroes and non-Negroes, massed in the greatest lobbying operation in the history of this country of its kind. What does it mean? It is difficult to say, but it is easy to say that what they were protesting against, the denial of civil rights, has been broadcast around the world in one of the most saturated coverages of any story that has ever happened in this town. And they are saying today that if Congress did not hear their message this time, that they are prepared to raise it again and again. That much is obvious.
And here you see people beginning to go home as the sun sets. Shadows begin to creep across the reflecting pool. Still marching, the marchers now, but now they're marching toward home.
Martin Luther King was the voice and the face of the civil rights movement. Every revolution, every rebellion is embodied in one person. Otherwise, it fizzles out. And Dr. King had the capacity to grasp the spirit, which was a mass movement, and voice it, articulate it, and to do so in such resonant timbres as you heard today. I mean, I just got gooseflesh. Every time I hear this speech, I get gooseflesh.
whenever I'm feeling down and out and very depressed, I put on one of his records, the tapes, and it's like an instant uplift.
It felt as if you were a part of something enormous, something that was happening for the very first time, something that never happened before and probably wouldn't happen again.
And you saw streams of people, long lines of people coming from every street that enters into this particular area. The people said, we're going to come and petition our government. We're going to tell our government what we think is right. They came and they were heard.
As I stood there that day, I was overwhelmed to look out and see that audience, to see that sea of humanity was one of the most moving feelings that I ever had.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation.
When people realized it was Martin's turn to speak, you could feel the crowd, rising in anticipation.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.
And so within a few lines, he had them. He had this big mass. And it became as intimate as a small church.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
In a way, that said it all. It wasn't a violent attempt to overthrow the government or to kill or destroy anybody.
I can remember being thrown out of the visitors gallery of the State House of Representatives in 64, 63, and now I sit here and I help to make the laws of the state of Georgia.
Freedom has gone to only about 2/3 of the black population. There's still a full third of the black population that still does not share in that freedom, essentially because they don't have a job.
We've won the right to sit in the front of the bus, but we can't yet own the bus company. We've won the right to sit at the lunch counter, but not all of us can pay for the meal. Were Dr. King, were he to come back to this occasion in 1983, I think he'd be disappointed.
Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside.
And that was what Martin Luther King kept saying. We are different and our differences ought to be appreciated, but we are all human beings. We are all the creatures of God, and we have a responsibility one to another.
There may be other marches with twice as many people 10 years in the future. Who's to say? There may be other speeches made that capture people's attention. There will never be another march on Washington like that in 1963.
We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at
last. The March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech catapulted King onto the national stage. Civil rights was now a concern of all Americans. The summer of protest spearheaded by Dr. King prompted President Kennedy